Today I'm going to tell you the story of how I started my career in New York City. It's a fascinating story and one that could not be repeated today, as you will see why. Over the years, I've been asked many times, how do you get into this business? How do you make a career? The story that I'm about to tell you will only show what I always believed, and that is that there are no rules, there is no method. You have to be in the right coffee shop at the right time, at the right party at the right time. There is no resume sending. I finished Berkeley College and I moved to New York with my wife then, and we stayed with friends. We decided to be there for a few days and then decide where to go and what to do. One choice was that something happened and I'll continue staying in New York, and the other was that nothing would happen and I would go back to Israel and use all the vast knowledge that I received from Berkeley on jazz and harmony and improvisation. It was a beautiful 2 years. I really got a lot from that school. We stayed with a couple of hairdresser ladies. They were from Israel and they accommodated us. And about 4 days after arriving, we all had breakfast and I said, guys, nothing is going on. I've been here 4 days. They burst out in laughter and they said, you could be here 4 years and nothing happens. This is New York City. And I was serious and I said, well, not for me. I can't accept it. And tomorrow I'm going to start doing something more aggressively. And next morning I got up, I got dressed and I took a tape with me, reel-to-reel tape, like we had in those days. And it's a tape that I produced literally the last day of being at Berkeley. I found this amazing singer and decided to produce her and record some of the best musicians at Berkeley, some alumni and some great students that were there at the time. And I would take this tape to New York and see if I can make any noise. So I got up that next morning and I hit the streets. I was going to go to several record labels and see if I could meet anybody or talk to anybody. So my first stop was CBS Records on 54th and 6th, I think. And I walked in. It was a huge, imposing building, one of those 6th Avenue high-rises. And I got into the elevator. There was no security or signing at reception like you have to do today. And the elevator took off. My stomach almost turned around. And I think they had 3 or 4 floors, CBS Records. And we got to floor number 30, I think it was, and the elevator opened. And there was, I don't remember, Bruce Springsteen, Neil Diamond. And I said, this is a great floor, but I don't think I'm going to get off here. I want to see what else there is. So the next floor, the elevator doors open, and I saw Placido Domingo and Elizabeth Schwarzkopf and, opera and Bernstein. And I said, wow, this is a really good floor, but this is not the floor I'm getting off on. And it went up one more floor, and the thing opened, and I saw Dave Brubeck and Duke Ellington and so on and so forth. I don't know who else was there, Count Basie, I don't remember. And I said, I think I'm going to start here. And I walked off and I went to my right, I remember, to reception. And there was a young lady there and she said, yes, how can I help you? And I said, it just came out of my mouth. Well, I didn't know who was there and what I was looking for, but I said, I'd like to see Teo Macero. And she said, do you have an appointment? And I said, well, no, but, I started to explain myself. I just came from Berkeley and I don't know how long I'm going to stay there. And she couldn't care less. And I went on and on. And she said, listen, you need an appointment. You cannot just walk in here. So I said, And I started walking away. And the first thing that came to my mind was, wow, I hit it right. Teo Macero was still there. Teo Macero, for anybody who doesn't know, you can Google or wiki him, was definitely one of the greatest, if not the greatest jazz producer of the 20th century. He produced Miles Davis. He produced Bitches Brew, which was the biggest selling jazz records ever to that point. And he produced Dave Brubeck and Duke Ellington. He was phenomenal. Anyway, I'm walking to the elevator and kind of looking around, and what came to my mind was there was a picture in a movie called All the President's Men where I think Dustin Hoffman wants to get in to see the editor and is kind of waiting around, and when the receptionist left, he walked right in. I remember that scene very well because I pulled the exact same thing somehow, because as soon as I got to the elevators and started kind of just looking at the photographs, the receptionist evidently had to go to the bathroom or something. And as soon as she left, I just walked behind her desk. There was a door there, and went into the door, and there was a long corridor there, and I went right all the way, and I saw names like Bob James, and I said, wow, Bob James, and Jay Chataway, and Bert DiCotto, who was a pop R&B producer at the time. And I walked back and kept looking at the labels, and the last label said Teo Macero. And so I knocked, and I opened the door myself. And this guy had these glasses sitting on his nose, his pin's nez, I think they're called. And he was reading a score, very impressive that people in the music business read scores. I remember the first time I did the round to meet the studio music heads, that each one of them wanted to see my score before they even would listen to my music. They wanted to see that you could write. Anyway, so who the F are you? Now, I want to say that I'm not going to do it, but every sentence was accompanied by that word, and I didn't know if I should laugh or run away. And I said, my name is Misha Segal, and I have a tape, and I just came from Berkeley. And he said, get the F out of here. And I said, no, but you don't understand. I tried to explain to him in my naive Israeli way that, I needed to see him. But, here was the greatest producer of all time, and I'm doing something that you're not supposed to do in that way. And I said, but, you have to hear this tape. These are all Israeli ways of talking at the time. You have to. Eventually, a little smile came on his face. I think it was kind of a mischievous thing. I think he realized that he's dealing with something very unusual, and I think he started getting amused, but not amused enough, where he said, I'm going to call the security if you don't get out of here, or get the F out of here. And I kind of looked at him, and he looked at me, and he said, come back tomorrow. And that's it, and made this hand movement, get out of here. And I went out. The lady was not there. I got into the elevator, and I was busting in the seams. I was exploding. I said, wow, I'm going to meet with Teo Macero tomorrow. And I went home, and I told my wife we made it. And the two girls said, what's going on? And I kind of told them the story, and they couldn't believe it. And that was it. The next morning, I took the tape, and I showed up at 8:30. There was no one there. I think there was a cleaning lady. So I just sat there and waited, and at about 9:30, the receptionist arrived, and she did a double take. She said, what are you doing here? And I said, I have an appointment. And she said, what do you mean you have an appointment? I said, I do. I spoke to Mr. Macero, and she was kind of confused, and she said, well, knock yourself out. I don't know when he's coming back. And I said, well, when do you expect him? And she said, he didn't give you a time? And I said, no. And she said, well, he's at the studio. He's recording something. So I just sat there, went through some music magazines, and I did not go to the bathroom, and I didn't get any water, and I didn't want to leave the spot and miss him. He showed up at 1:30. And he bolted from the elevator and went through, and he had an attaché case, and he walked in. And she looked at me, and I looked at her, and she buzzed him and said, Mr. Macero, there's a gentleman here to see you. Who is it? Well, he says you gave him an appointment. Oh, he said, yes, send him in. Well, that was quite spectacular. She sent me in, she showed me the way, and I walked in, and he said, what have you got? And I said, I have a tape that I produced at Berkeley before I left. He grabbed the tape, put it on his machine, and listened to it. I was very, very quiet, and he was also quiet. He rewound it and listened to it again.
We circle like wild birds, crazy high and fine. But she's got the clamps deep down under, always there, like silent thunder. Sixth floor window in the back bay, feeling quite alone. Francisco's gone, parked on some side street in the rain. We talked about places like Spain and Peru. So I slide into your day from time to time, and it only seems to puzzle you. Pack my bag for California, you head for South America, and you're gone.
6 times he listened to this thing. Miles Davis's producer, one of the greatest producers ever, 6 times he went back and forth and back and forth. And at the end he said, "So what do you want?" And I said, "I don't know. I wanted you to hear this." And he said, "Well, it's very good." He said, "I have an idea. I'm going to be leaving CBS Records. I'm going to go independent, and I'm starting a publishing and management company with Lou Levy." And Lou Levy was one of the greatest publishers of all time. He owned the Leeds catalog, songs for Frank Sinatra and later Streisand, the Andrews Sisters, and Nat King Cole. He was a big-time publisher, and he and Lou created this company. And he said, we're starting this company. Do you want me to manage you? And I said, yes. And he said, okay, go across the street, 6th floor. My partner is there, Lou Levy, and he will go over the formalities with you. So I went over there, and I don't think I felt the ground. It was one of those moments that I was fortunate to have a few of those in my life. I met George Martin that way, and I met Quincy Jones, and I met Berry Gordy, and many people like that. And it's quite a sensation to be around these great music makers, filmmakers, talent. So I went over there, and Lou said, "You must be good if Teo sent you, because you're our first client." And I said, wow. So that was the beginning. Like I said in the beginning, you cannot replicate this, and you cannot do this today because you'd be arrested. But that's how I did things back then. And so I could never answer this question, how do you make it in this business? I don't know. You just go with the flow and push a little bit. And never stop believing in yourself. It's a given. Because if you don't, nobody else will. So that week, I got a call from Teo. "I want you to write 2 charts for me for the Andre Kostelanetz Orchestra." Now, the Andre Kostelanetz Orchestra is probably not very known today anymore. It used to be one of those big orchestras that did pop tunes with a jazzy flair. And it was a 120-piece orchestra, both symphonic and big band. And it was actually amazing. I listened to the songs, and I looked at the lead sheet, And I said, when is the recording? When do you need it? He says, the recording is on Thursday. I need it by Wednesday night. And it was Monday. And previously, when I wrote a big chart like that or an arrangement like that, I would take a couple of weeks. So first of all, I underestimated how much faster I got after going to Berkeley, where I had to make a big assignment every day. But that was not the point. The point was that I was shaking in my boots because this was one of the most famous orchestras in the world. And I panicked. I thought I was going to throw up, actually. Not one, but two pieces. One by Charlie Chaplin, and the other one was by Duke Ellington. Somehow I managed it, and what was really, really amazing, I went to the CBS studios where I delivered the charts, and I sat there, and the first person walking in was Ron Carter, who was one of my idol bass players. He had this thing where he would do this slide, so tasteful. He's must be in his 90s. I think he's 90 years old. Still playing fantastic, and a wonderful man, actually. And he walked in with his bass, and I almost fell off my chair. You know, Ron Carter is going to be playing my notes. So we did this recording, and then he hooked me up with a group called Cosmology on Vanguard Records, and he assigned me the producer. Eventually, we stopped staying in touch, and it was okay because I was at that time starting to work with some of the greatest jazz musicians in the world. Buddy Rich, Maynard Ferguson. I did some orchestrations for Bob James and Dave Grusin, and my career took off. And then I did a couple of projects for RCA Records, where it went over to the R&B disco thing. I will get into it another time because it's a very interesting story by itself. But that's basically how my career started. And if you like the story, please subscribe, share, and like, and all of that stuff. But before I finish, I want to play a short piece from my recent album. I am going to make it a habit of playing a short something at the end of every broadcast like this as a goodbye piece. So enjoy, and like I said, see you next episode.